Well, while we often hear about bullying in school, adult bullying and bullying in the workplace is also quite common. Social worker, Friends for Life, Luke Sinnette joins us on set to tell us exactly how prevalent bullying in the workplace really is. Welcome.
Good morning.
Well, we often hear about bullying as it pertains to bullying in schools.
Yeah.
How would you say, or how rampant is it in the workplace?
Well, actually, although bullying in schools is a kind of burgeoning research that is happening, bullying in the workplace, still there isn't much evidence, and in particular in Trinidad, you can't find much. Friends for Life did a piece of research, but let me just say that Friends for Life, we work primarily with persons who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. We did a piece of research last year, and what we found was that something like 39% of the respondents to the survey said that they would have experienced some kind of victimization in the workplace. Sorry.
So you would say that usually bullies they display those sorts of behavior because they were once bullied.
Well, yeah. So there are two things. Is one, you kind of realize that persons who exhibit bullying behaviors feel a certain sense of persecution, like something is wrong in the world, and they take that frustration out on somebody who they perceive as the other, or somebody who might have a lower social ranking than them. Mm-hmm. The other kind of research kind of leads to that persons who kind of have low self-esteem, like that's connected very strongly to bullying. And that low self-esteem usually comes from maybe at one time they were bullied, or it might be like home situations that were particularly difficult while they were growing up.
You mentioned a little bit briefly, but who are usually victims of bullying? If we were to do a little psychological profiling of somebody who would tend to be a victim.
Persons who we would generally perceive as having low social standing, or persons who people perceive as the other. And then that can mean can be varying. So it might be, if you're in a place where like the military, it might be the person who's the smallest in the group. Sometimes on the job, it might be somebody who might be perceived as being gay or lesbian. In schools, it might be the child who's quiet, who kind of doesn't fit in. You kind of see in the US too, where kind of immigrants are kind of seen as the other. So all those different ways, people who are perceived as having lower social standing.
And what advice do you have for people like that? How do you get out of it? Do you respond violently as well?
Well, in Friends for Life, when I do counseling, yeah, because it's kind of particular with LGBTQI persons. And so one of the things that we look at is, number one, like how do we increase your own self-confidence? Because then that gives you the impetus to do something, because you kind of have to do something. Two, how do we kind of figure out what coping mechanisms you can develop in the situation itself, because sometimes this situation cannot be ameliorated. And then, of course, you have to kind of look at the bully, because in truth and in fact, if you only address the persons who the bullying is being perpetrated on, then it kind of will continue.
Yes.
And bullies really do have some issues that they're kind of working out, and if you can get to that, then you can get that to dissipate.
We'd like to zero in on that, but before we do that, you said that the person, the victim, should do something or develop coping mechanisms. Can we talk a little bit more about that? What are some of the coping mechanisms, and also what should they do? Right.
So one of the things is to increase self-esteem. And so when I work with my clients, we usually talk about anything that you do well. I don't care if it's a bottle pelting ceremony, it doesn't matter. Right. But one thing that you do good, and we kind of focus on that. If you develop confidence in one area of your life, and you kind of believe in your ability to be good at it, that seeps into other areas of your life. And what you begin to realize is that you then begin to display confidence in other ways that you just would not have normally. The other thing is, when we see develop coping mechanisms, these are figuring out, one, how to deal with conflict, and finding innovative and strategic ways to deal with conflicts. Sometimes it might not be prudent if, I'm 5'2" and my bully is 6'1", that what I should then do is try and fight back. That does not make sense. So how do I sit with a client and talk about what other ways that we can develop strategies that you can use to kind of counteract? And it might be getting persons on your side. It might be being strategic about who you talk to about the bullying.
Okay.
Because our clients are LGBTQI, you find that they're reluctant to kind of do something about it.
Right.
When we in the survey, we found out 69% of the persons said that they were victims of violence. So it was very specific to their gender identity or sexual orientation.
So bullies were, they were previously bullied. That's what you're saying, these statistics?
Oh, no. I was saying that the persons, my client, that's the other thing.
Okay,
the clients, right.
Yeah.
The clients who I have are usually victims. We don't have perpetrators as clients. And we're seeing that 69% of those persons, of the respondents, said that they would have experienced some kind of violence in some kind of social setting. However, only 66% of those persons reported it. And so what we realize is that sometimes there's a fear that you might report it to somebody and then you might be further victimized in that situation. But it kind of shows you just how difficult it is, particularly for persons who might be non-heterosexual, in trying to figure out how do I respond or counteract bullying.
Before we go into the actual workplace setting and what should be put in place for issues such as these, I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about the psychological profile of the bully and what would have led to that, and how has that impacted the approach in terms of changing that?
Well, so we kind of alluded to it before, in that there's a sense of wrongness or persecution on the self. And so I feel that there's an injustice towards me, and therefore I need to take that out on somebody. But what kind of makes it bullying is not that I'm kind of, sparring with somebody who has the same kind of strength as I am, but that you pick on somebody who is less than, exactly. Or you might have some areas in your life where you just don't have enough self-esteem, and in order to kind of give yourself more esteem, you kind of pick on somebody else, and then it kind of makes you feel more powerful, more stronger. And so the ways to counteract it, so traditionally, or maybe not traditionally, on the street, it might be seen as if somebody's a bully, that what you need to do is kind of face them with
in the same manner.
Exactly.
That's just a natural human reaction.
Exactly. And while that might give you some redress in the moment, it does not actually deal with the problem. And so what that person really does need to do is find out what are the areas in your life where there are deficits, and how do I fill those deficits emotionally? Because quite frankly, well-adjusted, happy people do not pick on other people just for their own self-gratification.
Wow. So self-esteem, that's something that you highlighted. Would you say that begins at home? What role do parents have in all of this? So
certainly it does start from when you're very young. And it's how do we encourage children, number one, to believe in themselves? How do we encourage children to believe in the possibility that they can do? And of course, give them a good sense of feeling whole and well about themselves, and also that the world is a place that is accepting and willing to have them. And if you can kind of inculcate those things in children, somebody will grow up to be well adjusted. The problem is that there's so many things in the world that are just kind of created to kind of pounce on somebody's spirit. And so when we look at the institutions that take care of persons, it's always thinking, how do we make somebody able to cope in the world that is difficult?
But have we been doing that in terms of the workplace and various institutions? Have we been utilizing any options in terms of addressing this issue?
So not very much as far as I understand, but I would say that the way that we understand, or the way that bullying kind of looks in the workplace, in forms of sexual harassment, a supervisor taking out their struggles on an underling, or somebody else kind of pointing to the other guy in the room and saying, well, that Makai man across there. There are ways like the employee assistance program, or anger management, or mediation, or all these different things that, particularly in the government service, and in some and in a lot of private institutions as well. Those are areas or ways that we can direct persons so that they can deal with it. And we have, laws and policies that deal with sexual harassment in the workplace, or discrimination on the basis of various things like sex, what is the others? Political affiliation, blah, 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 blah,
right.
blah.
But have we really been using those avenues?
That's the thing. And so I think we don't have a culture of
Because you may be the laughing stock, even if you resort to using those avenues. So then it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, so we kind of don't have a culture of doing that. But, you know, those things, the legislation comes and then people will begin to get in line. And so one of the things that at Friends for Life that we found is lacking is that there isn't sexual orientation or gender identity included in the Equal Opportunities Act. And it's an odd thing. I mean, we can sit in this country and that's the other thing, because I see that very often you hear that people say, well, you know, I don't know, gay people are fine. I don't see anybody in Trinidad getting killed or anything. Like, you know, why do you all need extra rights? And it's strange to me because that we can understand that somebody can be discriminated against if you of another religion, of another race, or for sex. And we know that people have lots of homophobic.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for? Well, you know, when you being homophobic towards somebody.
Your traits.
Intentions, right.
Okay.
But it's difficult for us to appreciate that that also needs to be included in the sex, in the Equal Opportunities Act.
But what laws do we have currently to help to, you know, alleviate?
Look, not for bullying, but as I was saying, it kind of looks in various ways. So it would be policies in the workplace around. It would be, of course, the Equal Opportunities Act for other things, and policies in the workplace around sexual harassment, around discrimination on HIV status, discrimination on various other kinds of things.
So you mentioned it doesn't have to be physical, it can be mental or emotional. How would you define bullying in the workplace, just to clarify?
So it is the use of intimidation, blackmail, maybe actual physical violence, and threats in the workplace setting on somebody who is perceived as having more power onto somebody else who they perceive as having less power.
Okay. And what advice do you have for people who may be experiencing this right now?
Tough.
What steps can they take?
The very first thing I think you need to do is get people in your corner. So find somebody who can support you in doing it, because sometimes it's very difficult to approach if somebody in power is being violent against you. It's difficult to reach out to somebody else in power. So you find somebody else who is on your side, who you can say yes, they can support you, and then figure out ways, creative avenues that you can go along to
report it,
to
take
report
it further.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
So you normally would take it to the next level and expect that something would be done.
That's the thing. I think it has to be taken to the next level. That's the first of all. But it's the person who has to have a certain kind of belief in the system. And so if in the workplace you have a policy of no bullying is going to happen here, or the person should not be discriminated against for any reason, then you can increase the efficacy of other persons in the belief that if I do report something, that it will be taken up.
So let's look at the employers now. What is their responsibility in all of this, or managers, when someone comes to them to report incidences like these? What is their responsibility? So
I think managers can, one, of course, is create those policies that says that discrimination does not happen in this workplace on any grounds at all. And then you can spell those out, and it's important to spell it out too, so people know on race, gender, sexual orientation, HIV status, because then I can then see myself in that policy. That's one. Two, that you create an atmosphere of it. If something does happen and somebody reports it, you have to take up that case, because my belief in the system comes from seeing other people get redress. And I think that is kind of how we're going to further the belief in it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sinnette. It's really a pleasure chatting with you, and we hope to probably do some follow-up sessions on this topic. All right. So, of course, chatting there with Luke Sinnette on adult bullying and bullying in the workplace.